grateful to be here with you today. Hey, Leigh.
Hello, everyone. My name is Leigh Rondon Davis. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. I am a Bay Area-based theater maker. Currently, I am a light-skinned African-American femme-identified person. I am wearing rose gold, oversized grandma glasses, some silver hoop earrings, and my favorite t-shirt that says the Sidewinders SC Ska Club, which was my dad's ska band when I was a kid. It's my favorite shirt. I am, again, a theater maker based here in the Bay. I am primarily a director, dramaturg, and performer. I am also a member of the inaugural Making Good Trouble cohort, which is a cohort of theater artists in the process of being trained to become anti-racism trainers, led by the incredible Beatrice Thomas in Authentic Arts and Media. I am a staff member at Shotgun Players and Crowded Fire Theater in San Francisco. I am also an artistic company member at Shotgun and Oakland Theater Project, and I am a small council member at the Forum Collective. So making a lot of theater in a lot of amazing places. And I'm really grateful to be here with all of you today and to hear your stories and share space. Pass it back to you, Claudia.
Thank you. This is Claudia. This conversation was started over a year ago, March 2nd, 2020, one of the last times I was inside a theater. We had a conversation led by myself, Leigh, Sean San Jose, discussing ways in which both organizations and patrons contribute to the performance around the performance. How and why are some theater goers made to feel unwelcome in theater lobbies or even in their seats? Why are these moments of ableism or racism, gender discrimination, age discrimination? We were trying to figure out why were they so common? And actually, we wanted to figure out what we were even talking about. Like, what does microaggression mean? What do we mean when we're saying that? And we wanted to invite ourselves to have a conversation about how we could help to decrease the incidence of oppressive behaviors taking place in public spaces. And now here we are a year later, and the way we produce work has radically changed, and yet the problem remains the same. And I will share, this is off script, but this is an interesting exchange with one of our collaborators who will be sharing a story. And they shared a story about when we first met. And when we first met many, many years ago, it was during a moment where there was a writer's strike. And in that conversation, talking about the writer's strike, we talked about how that writer's strike was actually a labor strike. And that labor strike actually resulted in some cultural impacts in terms of the kinds of stories we were watching and seeing. And it actually resulted in more reality TV. And in fact, it was, I think, one of the reasons that Trump TV show was on television even more. So I remind all of us listening and who are involved in this conversation that there's no such thing as a small performance. All of these incidents are important and they are cumulative. And I'm really grateful to have this conversation where we explore the performances taking place in our space.
And, last March at the town hall that we had then, there was this incredible turnout of theater makers and practitioners and audience members, all eager to learn and bring takeaways to their community. So we're excited to build on that conversation, to engage even another group of artists and even wider community of theater makers, theater lovers, in order to continue the conversation and also look at the way in which we've shifted over to these virtual spaces and see how some of these same things happen in these virtual spaces or how they're different. And so we're really excited to be with all of you today and hear these great stories.
And this is Claudia. One of the ways we keep the culture accountable is we are transparent. So this is an invitation for all of us to share story with each other. This digital story circle is, the design is inspired by the work of John O'Neill. So I will drop a few links in various places so you can further study the work of Junebug Productions and John O'Neill's work in just creating the story circle format. This is how we will be doing it. You will be invited to share a story of a time where you either witnessed or experienced a microaggression in a digital space, in digital audiencing, and you get to define that in any way that you want to. We're going to invite you to put your name in the chat so that we can, and that way you will call on yourself. So the order of speakers will be done by placing your name in the chat. When you tell your story, at the end of your story, you will say, that's my story, because it's kind of hard to tell when a story ends. And then after your story's done, you can say, and we will all respond with, after you say, that was my story, we will all respond with, thank you for telling your story. That will also give a little bit of time for the next person to get ready to tell their story. I'm gonna, please.
This is Leigh here. And just for folks watching at home on various streaming platforms, I'm holding down the Facebook feed. I believe someone else in the Zoom room is holding down YouTube, all the places where folks may be watching from. We're going to try our best to lift up comments in the chat. So, hey, Michael Asbury, we see you. Hello. We're going to try and lift up those comments that are happening in the chat. So even if you're not in the Zoom room, drop in your stories. Please engage, lift things up. If you hear something powerful that someone says, put it in quotes, drop it back in, and feel free to engage in whatever way you feel comfortable via these other streaming platforms. So thank y'all for being here.
Also, we have to acknowledge we might not get to hear every single story. So we will be managing our time collectively. Just deep, deep gratitude to everyone who came here to be involved in this conversation and this exchange. I feel like we have covered how this is going to work. Feel free to ask any questions. I think I'm also going to give one other piece of directions, and that is, if at any point in this practice, in this room, in this space, we feel like we've done a microaggression to each other, we're going to call it out. We're going to call it up. We're going to call it in. We're going to acknowledge it and deal with it in real time. So I do want to invite anyone, if something happens or a microaggression takes place in this space, please let us know in the chat, and we will interrupt and resolve. All right, my friends, we're just going to invite whoever wants to begin. In fact, you know what? I'm going to start first. I will start first. I will guinea pig. That feels like the nicest thing to do. But I want to invite folks to start queuing up. And Dawn Monique Williams, thank you so much for leading us in the timekeeping. This is Claudia, and this is my story. I have been witnessing the Derek Chauvin trial over TikTok with an audience of around 100 people. The first day, it was just amazing. But then trolls started to attack the space. So, and when I say trolls, I should say people, human beings. It seemed like as I was checking out the accounts of the human beings, they all seemed young, and they seemed like they were coordinating, and they were attacking the conversation with gaslighty comments and then insulting comments, because they did not want us to believe that Derek Chauvin was guilty of killing George Floyd. And there was an entire army of moderators, the mods, the mom mods. They were all Black mothers. They were home. And I've been asked to hold. Excellent. And now I'm continuing with my story. So we had all these moderators, and they were all moms, Black mothers, and they were amazing. The second somebody did a hate comment, blacked. The second somebody did some nasty sideways gaslighty thing, blacked. And it felt good to be in community, even as it felt really frustrating that the algorithm kept advertising our room to the people who wanted to attack it. but I was glad that we had moderators to help keep this space safer than it was. And that was my story.
Thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you for sharing your story.
Deanna, I see that you are up next. Feel free to jump in. You can introduce yourself before you begin.
Thank you, Deanna here. I have light brown skin and short black curly hair, and I'm wearing a light blue shirt, and I'm on a blue sofa. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm a guest uninvited on the land of the Keech Nation, spelled K-I-Z-H. So I was an audience member for a show, a comedy show that was based on a TV show. They were taking it live on the road for a tour. And the TV show is something that is poking fun at ableism, and it is something that is reclaiming mental illness and neurodivergence. So as an audience member, I had never previously actually been to a comedy show. I only went because of my personal connection with being neurodivergent, and I also lack social awareness. So I ended up doing what I didn't know was called heckling. I thought that I was celebrating and showing the person doing the show how much I loved them by trying to validate what they were doing. And they kind of poked fun at me and made fun of me in front of everyone, and I was the expense of a joke. But there wasn't space for the possibility that I just didn't know any better, and it was neurodivergence. That was my story.
Thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you for sharing your story. Hi, my name is Mia Iwatate Tagano. I'm Japanese, Armenian, Jewish, German, Welsh. Coming at you from Belmont, which is Ohlone territory. I am sitting on a hard stool wearing blue. And last year, I was in a show, my first Zoom show, and we had a talk back. And it was, the show was a cast of all women of color. The stage manager was a woman, and the director was a woman of color. And everyone identified as female. And we had this talk back, and someone in our cast said something about the ladies, talking about us ladies. And we were a very close group, even though it was Zoom. It was, we were family, and we started out the day with, "Hey ladies, how you doing?" Anyway, one of the audience members, and we could see everyone who was there, and said in the chat, not in verbal, but in the chat, chastising us for using, or chastising the actor for using the word ladies, and that we needed to rethink our language. And I can't remember everything that person said, but we were kind of taken aback because we had such love for each other. There was never anything about putting each other down. And this person didn't know us and didn't ask for a conversation, but wanted to teach us somehow. And as actors, we couldn't also, there wasn't the space to then come back with the response. So we just were silenced. And so later we contacted each other and said, "Hey, are you okay? I don't know what happened there." And it triggered all of us because we felt like our voice was somehow taken away, or I don't know the words exactly now. Even now, it still feels a little hurtful. But we supported each other in a way that soothed us. And yet, every time there was a talk back, I kind of had a moment of watch what I say, or the masses are going to come back with their teaching me. And I have that a lot, not a lot, but I have that where I feel paralyzed of speech because I'm not sure how it will be received. So I try to not let that dictate how I respond to things. Even now speaking, it's vulnerable, but I think it's important. So I was in another gathering where a friend of mine did a one-person show and had a talk back, and it was set up in such a way that we were told how we could respond, what the question was going to be, and what parameters were needed and necessary. And at first I thought, oh, well, I just want to say what I want to say. And then I thought, wow, thank you. Thank you for giving me that kind of structure and those kind of boundaries. And thank you for taking care of yourself that way. And it's just given me some opportunity to rethink how I proceed and how I want to be treated. So thank you. That was my story.
Thank you for sharing your
Thank you for
story.
sharing your story.
Sharing your story.
Please
Hi.
jump in. Yeah.
Yeah, my name is Katherine. I am a white, pink girl, woman, actually middle-aged these days, as it turns out, with curly blonde hair that's currently pulled up to a ponytail with a blue headband, wearing a blue shirt. And I'm more nervous than I normally am, which tells you how much this affected me, and I'm still working through it. But I am a former educator, and I worked at a very, what would consider themselves a very liberal school on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, with a hefty price tag. And I taught ethics, which was human rights and social justice there. And recently they've been having some discussions in the digital space about how teachers present and bring forth their own personality into the classroom, their own stories into the classroom. And so I was there to support some of my fellow teachers who are still at that school. And they were talking about, amongst many other things, about their partnerships, about their sexuality, which was very normal at the school when I taught there. And a parent with whom I was familiar from my time there sent me a private message that said, I wish these gay teachers would stop talking about their private lives. And I'm a gay teacher. I mean, I was a gay teacher at that space, and I was very open and out. It was a part of my curriculum to discuss the ways families structure themselves. And I was stunned because an assumption was made about my sexuality. And beyond that, I realized in that moment that her daughter never took home the lessons that were happening in the classroom around that. Perhaps she felt silenced or felt that it wasn't safe for, maybe she was taking care of me, maybe she was taking care of herself. And then I found myself entering any other digital space in this heightened sense of paranoia, because I felt like, well, is this private messaging happening between people as people are speaking? Is that the world we've created digitally, that or even speaking to each other, trying to find allyship and othering the people who are speaking? It just put me in such a weird place. It wanted me to completely disengage digitally, because I felt that it was an environment I had no control over. I do want to say I responded back to that parent in that private chat. I just said, well, I am a gay woman. And then she kind of disappeared and never said anything else. And in my fantasy, she just went and found somebody else to complain to. But it was really unsettling, and it helped me understand and reframe other people's experiences. You know, sometimes it does take that personal experience, unfortunately, to make us aware of how even digital spaces can feel like grounds to be attacked. And that is my story.
Thank you for telling your story.
Thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you for sharing your story.
Hi, so I'm Tony. I am a Black man, and I'm wearing a blue shirt. My story relates to the times just briefly after George Floyd's death. And it was very traumatic, everything that was going in the nation. And I had been invited to a fundraising event organized by a theater. And I was not planning to go, but at last minute I decided to go. And actually it was very interesting how they had created this safe space with a lot of love and support for the Black community that was in pain. And for me, it felt like really like a lifeline at that moment. It really impressed me because it marked me and how important it was to be connected to the theater community. Unfortunately, a few days after, we had a debriefing session about the event in which somebody said that the portion that was dedicated to acknowledge the pain that some of us were feeling was way too much, that it had been tiring because it was part of a very difficult week for everyone. And that was hurtful. And that is my story.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you for sharing
your
your
story.
Thank you, Tony, for sharing your story.
Thank you for sharing your story.
I'm Tracy Camp. I am a Black woman. I'm wearing a green shirt and I have no hair practically, well, a little bit of hair, and I have dangly earrings. And my story, it makes me really grateful for the way Claudia started, the way Claudia introduced herself. I'm not quite sure I remember the words that she used, but I believe they were access check-in. My son was in a show a few months ago, and he was one of 4 teenage performers in this show. And after the show, there was a talk back. And my son, my 18-year-old son, was the only male among these 4 teenagers. And during the talk back, the moderator would ask questions and the teenage cast members would answer, including my son. But when the female cast members would talk, my son would be talking to himself, muted in his little Zoom box, but it was like really, really obvious that he was talking to himself. Like it really stood out, much more so than if he had been in person, because there are like 4 little boxes on the screen. One female is speaking and my son is talking to himself, muted. And I texted him to say, stop being rude to your castmates, listen when other people are talking. And he didn't stop, he just kept on. Afterwards, I talked to him. I was like, what's wrong? What's going on? You know, you seem to me like an arrogant male, like thinking that your words were more important than the words of your female castmates. You're the only male there, and your female castmates are intently listening to you as you're speaking. And he told me that the only way he knew to prepare his answers, like when he was asked a question on the spot, was to talk to himself. And he thought it had to do with his disability, which is auditory processing disorder, which I constantly forget he has because it doesn't affect his life in a huge way. And so he was upset, I was upset, and it made me think about, you know, how he has male privilege while his castmates all had, I assume, neurotypical privilege. And so this idea of balancing those out. I had a similar situation. I'm taking a class and there's a student in our class who is neurodivergent. And I noticed that student does the same thing that my son was doing when we are sharing, various classmates are sharing our work in the class. The student seems to not be paying attention. And the instructor of the class actually said in front of the entire class to the student, if you can't pay attention, please turn off your video. And the student did, but the student didn't return to class. That was my story.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you for sharing your story.
Hello, my name is Richard. Can everyone hear me okay? Perfect. My name is Richard Moscada, and I'm zooming in from Ramaytush territory, otherwise colonially known as San Francisco. For access purposes, I'm a light-skinned Mexican person with a backwards baseball cap and a black sweater. There's a white wall and a curtain behind me with the bright sun shining in. I was recently the audience of a virtual production produced by a PWI, predominantly white institution. And there we were in the virtual lobby awaiting for the show to begin. The leaders of this institution began to chat with audience members to discuss their access needs and whether or not they needed more information to enjoy the show. There was one particular audience member who was having difficulty signing in, where the production team decided that they would publicly announce these issues in the chat. They went as far as to say that there was a sassy audience member they were dealing with, and that they would be back with us shortly.
That is my story.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you for sharing your
Thank you for
story.
sharing your story, Richard.
Thank you for sharing your story.
Hi, I'm El Bay, and I am zooming in from the unceded land of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people, otherwise known as El Cerrito, colonially. And I am a Chinese American genderqueer person, got big green glasses, medium brown skin, a kind of pinstripe blue collared onesie, and my too long shelter-in-place hair is pinned up, black hair. So I was asked as an actor performer last year to do an interview with a theater company that I've worked with and I adore. The interview was super fun. And at the very end, the interviewer, who is someone I also care about, they asked me if my name, L, my first name, L, stood for, and then said my dead name on air. And it was a moment where I went into fight or flight. And those folks who know me, like, know I talk a big game, but in that moment, I just like laughed and was like, I'll tell you later. And it was a kind of a thing where, I mean, she obviously didn't know that was my dead name, but it was a thing where I think because of the weird Zoom public space too, like I didn't feel like it was a moment where I could actually speak to her about it, when in another time, maybe privately I would, but it was that weird, yeah, like public private kind of place. And she's probably seen my dead name because it's still my legal name on, you know, on checks or W-9s or something like that. So that's what got it in her head. But yeah, it was just it was a moment of a little bit of shock, and then later shame, because I didn't say anything or speak about it with her afterwards. So that's my story.
Thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Quincy. I am a Filipino woman. My pronouns are she, her, hers. For access needs, my hair is black. I'm wearing a red shirt and I have a plant behind me. I would like to share a story about a time where I facilitated a Zoom murder mystery night for a mixture of both performers and non-performers alike. To prepare for this, I sent out characters to every single person with very vivid descriptions and allowed them, hey, please read ahead, please get familiar. I specifically chose a murder mystery night that was, and characters were scattered, so they were non-gender specific, ethnic specific, so that everyone felt like we can come and play and enjoy a moment of theater via Zoom. The night that we began performing, it was really wonderful. We had a great time. Unfortunately, we had one gentleman who did not read his script and chose to interpret his character with what we all understood as an Asian accent, and utilized historical and fictionalized interpretations within that realm for their character, which ended up putting a sour taste within the community as it derailed us from the story script. I was lucky to be in a space with a bunch of people who utilized theatrical ways to derive away from this moment of disheartening for myself and for other participants. We continued to move on, and it was feedback that was given to myself and to the rest of the community that so we didn't end up with that happening in the future. But it is something that carries with me as an anxiety within a digital space, and a question within myself of how much better could I have prepared for this, and how much of this does this lie on me as being a facilitator, versus also, you know, different ways to make sure that that space is for myself as an Asian woman and other Asian folks to feel safe to be able to create digitally. So that is my story.
Thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you for sharing your story. Well, I believe we're now entering the time in the conversation where we broaden into a larger conversation about the connective threads of these stories.
Yes. I am so grateful to all of you for sharing your stories. I am so grateful to all of you who are watching on the streams, all of you in the Zoom room listening, holding space for one another. I think this is the power of collective, right? And the power of community, that we are all showing up together and listening and making space for one another. I am going to get us started with some threads, some things that I heard, which I apologize for not naming this beforehand, but when you saw me looking down to my right, I was taking some loose notes on what was being said, some themes or some things that were really pinging for me. And so I feel like all of these stories are so specific and unique to the context and unique to the individuals. But some of the things that I heard that feel like they were overarching is sort of this deep felt need for compassion in these spaces. I think we come in hot, right? We have all of our opinions, we have our worldviews, we have our perspectives, our lived experiences, and we know what we know. But we come in hot sometimes to spaces and want to show up as best as possible, not realizing that we're not maybe seeing the other person's perspective or the other side of the situation. And how can we show up in these digital spaces and in our in-person spaces with a deeper level of compassion or empathy, or even just openness to someone else's perspective and lived experiences and worldviews. So I appreciate all of you that sort of lifted that up for us. And I want to pass it to Claudia to see if there was anything that you wanted to lift up.
Sure, yes. So what I love is that this was a very sloppy exercise, y'all. We're not heavily resourced, and yet I believe that we just got speakers that gave us a little bit of a national storytelling that took place, because I know some of the specificities of some of these stories where some of those digital events were taking place. We've heard from people who exist as purely audience and they are not arts practitioners. We've heard from folks who are art makers. We've heard from folks who are bored. So I just want to name that there's been a variety of positionalities with the stories that we have heard, and that's telling to me. I heard people tell stories about experiencing negativity in the audience. I've heard stories about people who planned and tried to respond to it. And also I heard stories about folks being surprised by it. And I think I'm hungry to hear some questions from the broader community to find out, what are you interested in this moment? So I'm curious, for those who helped to pull this conversation together, what were some of the reasons why you felt like this was a necessary conversation? So this is me saying, hey, Shay, hey, Josh, you pulled us together. Why did we decide to do this again?
Well, I'll say, thank you all for sharing your stories. I think, when we did this a year ago, the idea was to look at how we can all make our spaces more welcoming. and really recognizing the reality that our space had not been as welcoming as we would like it to be. I remember one thing that Sean San Jose said a year ago about how, you know, if you're the host of the party, you've got to set the tone for it. And so I'm really curious. I mean, it's so useful to hear all of these examples of experiences that people have had, and I'm really excited to think about what can we do as the hosts of the party to set up an environment in which these things don't happen, or at least don't happen as much.
Well, thank you, Josh. I think that's such a powerful and beautiful intention, like recognizing, observing a thing, recognizing that something is not working or something is not going the way that we hoped. Our audiences are not feeling welcomed in our space. Tony Drummond, who you heard from earlier, he introduced me to something that I think is really powerful, a sense of belonging. It's not just enough to open the doors. It's the fact that people, it's more important that people feel like they belong there, that they are valued and respected and wanted in our spaces. And so we're theater as an industry, we're having these big cultural shifts, and we're figuring out how to open the doors wider and wider. And now it's going to be on all of us, not just the producers or the staff members, the artistic teams, but even audience members, people who support the theaters in our boards, institutional donors, to help cultivate that sense of belonging. And something else I heard today was sort of this idea of cultural competency, right? There are things that we don't know, right? We know what we know, and we don't know what we don't know. And so how can we, one, learn and grow as individuals, as communities, to be better able to hold space and create a sense of belonging for anyone of all identities, right? Anyone of any identity in our space. So thinking about how we are creating welcoming spaces, talking about what our culture is for folks who are neurodivergent came up today, for folks with intersectional identities, and also creating a sense of belonging with an intersectional lens. We talked about having one making an assumption about what's going on and not realizing that there's something totally different happening as well, or someone else with a totally different perspective of what's going on. And so how can we communicate those things to one another with like compassion and care, and also as an opportunity for all of us to learn and grow together and to be able to step into solidarity with one another. I think it's like the really important, juicy thing. The big question that's lingering for me is like, what are the individual things that we as individuals can be doing to step into solidarity with one another? And that is, I realize I posed that as maybe a rhetorical question, but I actually would really love to hear from folks in the room, folks watching on the streaming platforms, throw them into the comments or the chats there. But like, what is something that each one of us can do, or you can do? I'm pointing at all of our beautiful Zoom boxes here, all of our faces here, to step into solidarity with other folks.
I'm also just please respond to that. Please respond to that and raise your hand and voice if you would like to do a response. I'm curious about this cultural moment that we're living in, where so many of us are beginning to tell the stories that were suppressed, beginning to recognize that our producerial structures have been racist or sexist or ableist and have not actually been having the human beings embody their own stories. Once we start doing that, we've created a new set of circumstances for our entire audience. And why does the audience react? To try and get people to perform in specific ways that they think are the ways they need to react. So I'm thinking specifically of Tony's story, of some of those audience members saying, we didn't like the show you did. Like, you told me a story of a performance that was beautiful and supportive and actually great, and then that commentary souring it. Or the story that you were telling, Katherine, where somebody was under the impression that the dominant culture was one where it was safe for them to say that out loud and to say some people are not welcome. one of the things that I want to note for Aurora Theater is that you have signs in your space, like physical signs. I wonder if there are ways that can happen digitally as well.
Mhm. I see a comment from Randall here in the Zoom chat. Thank you for sharing your stories. Very generous, most helpful. In quotes, when we learn and grow together. Thanks for lifting that up, Randall.
Grabbed me like a hairy hand. It's what we're doing right here. And that's what I'm here is really listen and learn. You know, I've been talking and producing for 40 years. It's time for me to listen. And this is to really broaden the scope of the picture. So thank you.
Thank you, Randall. Thank you for being here, for listening. That's all we can ask. Thank you. I'm curious if
my pleasure.
I love this love. Did I see a hand pop up? Maybe I missed it. Okay. Great. Ooh, I see more comments coming in from Deborah. It can be so difficult and uncomfortable. However, naming the discomfort in the moment when it happens. I'm trying to do this more and it can be tough, but it is like a muscle that needs to flex.
Oh my goodness. Yes, yes, yes to that. And can we just remind ourselves that this is practicing, this is rehearsing. You don't open a show the day that you get the script. You actually have a process to get there. This is the process.
Truly. And from Mia, thinking about it now, we could have spoken up, explained our use of the word ladies, taken out the charge. Whoops, hold on. I'm reading
charge of silence.
Taking out the charge or silence, made it a conversation. That's yeah. How can we be in conversation with one another? It's not just my idea, my truth is the only truth that exists, but I have a truth and I want to hear your truth, and how can those truths be in conversation with one another? Thank you for lifting that up, Mia.
I'll acknowledge though that when these moments happen, we often have the fight or flight reaction. Like our bodies fill with adrenaline, we don't know what to do, and that's completely understandable. So I don't want to feel like we're giving people the feelings of like, oh, I have to do some superhuman justice performance when these moments happen. This is about figuring out collectively, what can we shift, change, grow, build? I'm right now trying to figure out, oh, what is digital signage? Is it something I put on my website before people get to the space? Is it something that I embed in the Zoom invite that people get before they even get into my Zoom? How do I visually tell people that this is how we do this?
And I see a hand from Deanna. Do you want to jump in, friend?
Yes, Deanna here. And first, I actually forgot part of my story, which was that when the artist was responding to me, they actually said in front of everyone that to ignore me because I'm probably drinking, and that's probably why I was behaving the way I was. So I think that for my specific situation, what could have been better was to have, for example, like a way to communicate access needs that was outside of the realm of like disability rights and compliance, right? Where like I would be able to say like, oh, like sometimes I come off differently than I intend, right? And part of that is also, I think, what the access check-in does, and what the access check-in kind of tries to like reframe in our minds is that is like getting into the practice of talking about those things and making space for communicating those things in real time conversations. Something else I do is I have my website because I do access consulting, and I tell people up front what are the things that I am familiar with accessibility wise, and what are the things that I try to do in any space that you can expect to be with me in. So just various ideas for how we communicate those things. Check.
Thank you. Thank you, Deanna. You lifted up so many incredible things. The practice of access check-ins is a thing that many theaters are adopting, many communities are adopting, and an opportunity for folks to share how they show up and how they, what they need from the collective, the community, in order to show up and be able to be their authentic selves. That's a really great question. How can we incorporate access check-ins into our theater making, into our virtual performances that Claudia talks about, which is really exciting to ponder and figure out. I think also what I love about access check-ins is it invites us to focus on self-care and also community care. So if I hear someone with an access need that's calling for me to state my name before I speak, which I am not doing a great job of modeling today, I apologize, friends. But I can step into solidarity by doing that to support my community member, right? And it's an easy, simple thing to do. And it goes a long way in terms of building trust and community.
Well, I'm just going to read another beautiful call to action and invite all of our colleagues who are in this. This is a pretty amazing brain trust of human beings that I'm witnessing in this digital space right now. So please put your calls to action, either your personal call to action or your invitation for the public to do. But I'm going to read Jordan Battle's comment out loud because I love it. I can continue to step into the space in solidarity by constantly asking myself, who is not represented in the room? And I'm also going to read this comment. It seems microaggressions happen more when people feel anonymous and disconnected from each other. When gatherings are intimate, both in person and virtual, individual acknowledgements, greetings are a simple way to build connection. I love that. I love that. And it's real true.
Thank you, Heather. Yeah, there was something I remarked there is that the anonymity that virtual spaces allow can sometimes be really useful for folks to step into their power and to be braver, but it also allows for harm and violence to happen, right? And so checking the way that we are using anonymity tools to either harm or to lift up others or ourselves. It's like a constant balance there, right? We heard about trolls attending a space, events that are supposed to be safe spaces or brave spaces for all the participants, a space to honor and to be a place to be in community. And those trolls can pop up and pop out. And again, Claudia, I love what you said, that they're not just trolls, they're human beings behind computers. That can pop in, cause harm, and pop out with little to no consequence. And I'm curious, is there a way that we as community members, as a collective, can be like that amazing army of mom mods, calling things in and up as we see them, protecting the most vulnerable in our community, protecting ourselves and one another? I think that's really exciting. How can we all engage in that work together?
Well, as we bring this amazing conversation to a close, can I just say, I don't want to bring the conversation to a close. I would like to stay here for several more hours, for several more days. I am reminded, I said this before, this is the work. We don't do it in an hour. We do it every day. And I appreciate you in helping us do an intense session that can help us do better work for the rest of the year. Thank you for helping us to resist the pull of urgency so we can take more time to listen and attempt to see this from all of these different perspectives. Welcome to our space.
Thank you all. Thank you all so, so much. Thank you to everyone watching at home on these streaming platforms, on Facebook, on YouTube, through HowlRound. Thank you to all of the amazing folks that showed up today to listen, to share. For all of our story sharers, thank you for your vulnerability and for sharing your wisdom and your experiences with us. A huge thank you to Aurora Theatre, Shotgun Players, Z Space, Calling Up Justice, and Theater Bay Area for supporting this work. Claudia, did you have something you wanted to drop in, my love?
I'm just dropping into the link. Somebody asked for the access check-in, so boom, there we go. Spreading the love.
Woo! More info about access check-ins going around. Hopefully that's a practice that spreads in more places. Is there anything else that we need to add or do to close this out for today? I throw that to Claudia or any of our co-organizers.
Just sending y'all gigantic affirmation. Thank you. I'm seeing in the chat. Thank you. Great discussion. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Aurora. Thank you to all who made this happen. Thank you to Claudia. Thank you to Leigh. Thank you. Grateful for this practice and community. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much, Leigh and Claudia. Thank you, everybody.